I'm Jen Strauss. I work at the Berkely Seismology Lab, and I'm here to talk to you about ShakeAlert. Just for clarity's sake, I do also work on the MyShake smartphone app project, which is a licensed operator of the ShakeAlert system. So I know a few of you have MyShake on your phones, but today I'm just here as a representative of ShakeAlert. MyShake is a licensed operator, but we are not like specially endorsed by ShakeAlert or anything like that. So today I'm going to share about ShakeAlert public earthquake early warning alerts. And I'm going to start with a primer on just earthquakes and earthquake hazards for people on the call that might not be super familiar with all that is entailed with earthquake hazard. Okay, so that did not advance my slide, so let's try that again. Okay, so earthquake hazard is national, right? You might not think about Maine or Georgia as having a particularly earthquake-prone area of the United States, but earthquake hazard is national. And it's important to think about this because a lot of times people want to discuss risk in terms of human lifetimes or oftentimes the 30-year mortgage of your house. But earthquakes happen on geological time frames. So when we talk about a recurrence interval of an earthquake, or this earthquake hasn't been happening in a long time and it's due, we as humans like to really think about, well, what is my risk right now? What is my risk next year? But as seismologists, as people who study earthquake hazard, and the risks associated with that hazard, we really have to think more broadly and over a much larger time span. The earthquake that happened in the Midwest was a really big, really damaging earthquake, and our infrastructure has really changed since the 1800s. And so people might want to consider that place does have earthquakes. But that being said, there are places in the US that are more prone to earthquake hazards than other areas. So what are those places? Well, mostly the West Coast of the United States. If you look at the annualized earthquake losses for the United States, as FEMA did back in 2017, you can see that the vast majority of the annualized costs happen in California. And if you add sort of the next tier of that, you could include the entire West Coast of the United States. Hawaii and Alaska both have a lot of earthquake hazard, but they don't have as much annualized risk because the population is lower there and the estimated building damage is also lower there. So that's why even on the previous map, you saw a lot of red areas in Alaska and Hawaii, but the numbers are much smaller on this map. So if you do a cost-benefit analysis and you want to put together a system that could help people know about earthquake risk in real time, it stands to reason that you would start on the West Coast because that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. Okay, so globally, what is our earthquake hazard and why do earthquakes happen the way they do? Well, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, mountain building, all of the beautiful landscape that we have here in California takes place along plate boundaries. And 80% of the world's earthquakes occur on these plate boundaries. You can get sort of crustal earthquakes that happen in the middle of the plates, but the vast majority of your earthquake risk and earthquake hazards are on these plate boundaries. So if you look at this map of the world, you can almost draw the plates by following these black and red dots on the map. Those are showing earthquakes that happen, and lo and behold, they're happening on all of these plate boundaries. And if you notice, one side of the map is much more densely populated with these black and red dots than the other half of the map. And so Around the Pacific Ocean, we have what's called the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is a 25,000-mile long region that basically outlines the northern half of the Pacific Ocean. And that's where a lot of earthquake hazard is located. And so let's drill it down to California and see what happens in our neck of the woods. Okay, so we have two maps here of California. They have kind of a similar look and feel. If you look on the left-hand map, the red dots are showing past earthquakes as measured by the California Integrated Seismic Network. Okay, these earthquakes kind of follow along these black lines, which are the faults. They have a lot of clustering up in the Mendocino area. You get a lot of clustering in that fork of the Bay Area where the Hayward and San Andreas faults meet. And you also have a lot of clustering down in Southern California. Now, if we look at the right-hand side of the map, we also have red dots. And on the right-hand map, the red dots are where all of our people are. Those are the highest population density areas of our state. So as I mentioned, this mountain building, this beautiful landscape building that we have in California is beautiful and it's where people want to live. But the problem is that that is also where the highest hazard is. So we have effectively put all of our people on top of the earthquakes instead of having them live in more safer areas of the state that don't experience such high earthquake hazard. Okay, so let's zoom in even more and focus just on the Bay Area. So there are two major fault systems in the Bay Area. One is the San Andreas Fault, and the other is along the East Bay, which is a Hayward-Rogers Creek fault system. And both of them start kind of like collapsing in a fork just south of San Jose. And so no matter which fault ruptures in the Bay Area, if it ruptures to a high enough degree, we're going to feel it on both sides. There's not like some wall of the San Francisco Bay that prevents shaking. It does moderate the shaking a bit, but we're all susceptible. We're all going to feel that. We actually experience around 30 earthquakes per day. Don't know if you knew that, CERT team, but there's about 30 earthquakes per day that happen in Northern California. The thing is, most of them are not felt. They're small enough magnitude, small enough shaking intensity that nobody really feels them. But we live in a very active area, and sort of at any time, one of those little tiny earthquakes could actually end up being a big one. Now, the East Bay has a higher earthquake hazard than the San Francisco Peninsula due to the higher number of faults that transverse the East Bay, and also the fact that the East Bay has not had a major earthquake event since San Andreas has. We talk about the big one, like the 1906 quake. And so there's a lot of motion, there's a lot of movement. You can see there's probabilities up on here, and that is the probability that a magnitude 6.7 earthquake or higher will hit that fault between now, well, 2014 and 2043. That's how we measure these things. So you can see that the Hayward Fault area has about a 33% chance, whereas the San Andreas, especially the northern portion, is about 22%. So it's not zero on either, but it's also not 90. And so how do we prepare citizens and businesses and governmental agencies to react to these felt earthquakes and or damaging earthquakes that are going to happen in our area eventually? Well, one of the ways that we are doing this is through ShakeAlert. ShakeAlert is a group of agencies, both governmental and university level, that are working together to build a system that can alert people that an earthquake has happened and shaking is imminent to their area. And the way ShakeAlert works is we use all of the earthquake sensors that are running up and down the west coast of the United States. And an earthquake can begin anywhere, right? On these faults, anywhere up and down the west coast. And the epicenter of the earthquake is, generally speaking, for Northern California, going to be about 9 kilometers deep. When the earthquake happens, energy is released. And the energy is released in different forms. So the fastest moving energy is called a P wave. And that's a compressional wave. So you can think about it as going da 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 up to the surface of the earth. And that is sometimes what people feel. Sometimes people mention hearing like a thud or feeling a jolt right before an earthquake happens. That's that P wave coming up under your feet and kind of lifting buildings or lifting people a little bit. Now, the great thing about a P wave is, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, this is a less damaging wave. Because it's coming up from underneath us, people, buildings, infrastructure are really good at standing up from vertical forces. They have to deal with gravity all day, so being raised up and lowered, generally speaking, is an okay thing. So what we do is we monitor for those P waves. And if one of our sensors recognizes that there is a P wave that just hit, that information is sent to what we call the central brain of ShakeAlert. And the algorithms and processes that make up ShakeAlert are automatically trying to characterize that P wave and forecast what's coming. So in red, the very scary color on this plot, is the S wave. S wave you can think about as an energy wave that moves back and forth as it's coming up to the surface of the earth. And that causes a lot of damage, right? Bridges really don't like when the ground shifts laterally underneath them. People don't have a really good ability to stand up when the floor is sort of jerked out from beneath them. So what we do is we characterize the P wave and we forecast what we think the magnitude and the shaking level of that earthquake is going to be. And once we say what we think all of that information is, then ShakeAlert works with licensed operators to redeliver that message out to people so that they know what's coming and they can take protective action. Okay, so what kind of information are you going to get? A lot of times we hear about, this earthquake was a magnitude 6 or this earthquake was a magnitude 5. There's this great quote from the movie LA Story where Steve Martin is sitting at a cafe and there's a rumble and he's shaking and everybody's trying to drink their drinks and he's like, oh yeah, that's about a 5.5. That is in common parlance and that's kind of what we discuss as people, but that's not really the whole story. So let me show you a little movie. Okay, this is a movie of the San Andreas, or the Hayward Fault, excuse me, earthquake scenario. And what you're going to see is under San Pablo Bay, an earthquake begins, and it's going to start to rupture southward along the Hayward Fault. So the San Pablo Bay area is the epicenter, and you see these blue and yellow and red, and then this really scary black line that is emerging as the rupture goes on. So this is imagining a magnitude 7 earthquake that is rupturing. So the interesting thing to note here are twofold. First, the rupture takes a while to rupture. It's not like you get boom, magnitude 7 is shaking the same everywhere, and everybody has their full experience once the earthquake starts. No, these ruptures take a long time to move that massive rock.
Hey, Jen, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
It's just interesting to me. I can see that it all coming south, but it's not going north towards Santa Rosa.
Exactly. So if you imagine, everybody's been to a body of water, I'm assuming, and has chucked a pebble into it. right, when they were a kid, or maybe you're super fun and you do it as an adult too. If you drop a pebble, you get these rings that come out, right? And if you drop the pebble just in one spot, and it's a smallish pebble, you get nice concentric rings that move out the same way everywhere, okay? What happens if instead of dropping a pebble, you're dropping a tree branch this way? Well, what's going to happen is the waves where the first part of the tree branch falls over, those waves are going to start moving out, those concentric circles. But then the next part of the tree branch moves and you get concentric circles, and then the next one and the next one. So those circles of amplitude, you have the high water and then the low water areas on these rings, they can add with each other. So the high areas can start to stack on each other and get even higher. So you experience more shaking, you get more waves in the water. But also that tree branch falling has a direction. So there's directivity to the earthquake. So an earthquake of this size, a magnitude 7, doesn't only happen at the epicenter. We use the epicenter because for small earthquakes, pretty much there's not much length, and so we can think of the earthquake as only happening there. But large earthquakes, the entire rock moving all the way from San Pablo Bay to Fremont physically moves, right? The whole thing physically moves. And so it keeps going southward. It's not moving up towards Santa Rosa. No rock up there is really moving. It's the rock along the Hayward Fault that's moving and is pushing the East Bay south. Like
that is an excellent explanation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So the other thing that you can notice is some areas have a lot of red. That's because the fault is physically moving over on that area. And some areas are more orange. Some areas are more yellow. Some areas up near Santa Rosa are blue. And that means that even though the magnitude is 7.0, people are experiencing the earthquake in a different way. And so you don't actually have a scenario where somebody can guess the magnitude of the event based on how they experience the event. We did a very informational video by Dr. Angie Chung at our lab that kind of explains this magnitude versus intensity a little bit better. And so I really want to take these 2 minutes to show you this video because this discussion on magnitude is so ingrained in how we discuss earthquakes and hazards, and I feel the need to sort of break this discussion ways. So we're going to move on to Angie.
Hi everybody, my name is Angie Chung, and today I'm going to try and clear up some confusion around two commonly used seismology words. The first is magnitude, and the second is intensity. So the magnitude of an earthquake refers to how big the earthquake is. It refers to how much energy was released during that earthquake. The intensity, on the other hand, can vary. It's the description of how much ground shaking there was. So for example, with the recent Ridgecrest earthquakes, the magnitude was magnitude 7.1. That magnitude doesn't change depending on where you are. It's the characteristic of the earthquake. On the other hand, the intensity can really vary depending on where you are in relation to the earthquake. So for example, the people who live in Ridgecrest, they felt very strong intensity shaking, perhaps up to level 9 on the modified Berkely scale. The people in LA, on the other hand, they may have only felt intensity 4 or so. The intensity decreases with distance. So if you're further away from the earthquake, you don't feel as strong shaking as the people who are closer to the earthquake. So again, the intensity can vary, but the magnitude stays the same. The magnitude tells us about the earthquake itself. So, for example, if this is the epicenter here, and this is the first dinosaur, and this is the second dinosaur, if this is a large earthquake, the first dinosaur is going to feel a lot stronger shaking, a lot higher intensity shaking than the dinosaur out here. So perhaps this dinosaur felt level 7 intensity shaking, but this dinosaur way out here, he only felt level 1 intensity shaking. So the intensity can vary, but the magnitude of the earthquake, that's always going to stay the same. So in summary, the magnitude of an earthquake tells us about the earthquake itself, how much energy was released during that earthquake. The intensity, on the other hand, that can vary depending on where you are in relation to the earthquake. I hope that helps clear up some confusion. Let me know if you have any questions.
And so I encourage you, if you do want to partner with ShakeAlert and do want to put in responses based on the information that you get from ShakeAlert, really focus on the intensity, because that's where you're going to get your most information from. So what are the mitigation strategies that people can use to respond to not only general earthquake risk, but also when they receive a ShakeAlert, if you have that capability? First thing is always hardening of infrastructure. Earthquake information and earthquake early warning does not make your chimney not fall down, right? Just because you know that the earthquake is coming doesn't do anything to retrofit your house or harden your infrastructure. So that always needs to be done, and we should make investments that way. And the Bay Area has done a really good job, especially for lifelines in that area. Encouraging seismic retrofitting of private businesses and private homes is also important, so that we can be more resilient, especially in the midst of a housing crisis. You don't want a bunch of people unable to be housed on top of the already unhoused after an earthquake event, which could be quickly remedied by just some seismic retrofitting. Training is also important. There's the annual shakeout drill that people can participate in. Because earthquakes are not an everyday occurrence, they're not a monthly occurrence in terms of felt earthquakes. Most of the time, they're not even a yearly occurrence in the way that you have to really think about infrastructure impacts. So training then becomes very important, because people cannot smartly respond if they're not trained. Because a lot of time when you get a warning or something confusing happens, frightening, you feel a shake and you're like, oh gosh, what should I do? The first thing you think about is, oh gosh, what should I do? And then you start trying to process. Whereas if you have good training and every time you get a certain kind of information, you know to take certain protective actions, you're more likely to just, by your gut, take action. The other thing that's important is mutual aid plans. We know from the 2014 South Napa earthquake that this was very important. As Tom very much knows, we had ShakeAlert running in the EOC for San Francisco Department of Emergency Management. Unfortunately, a few things happened. Number one, the earthquake happened at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so nobody was in the EOC before the earthquake happened, right? It's not like people just hang out there all the time. So the warning came in, but nobody really got it until after the fact. And a lot of people, it took them a while to, get everybody spun up. Well, meanwhile, in the Napa area, their first reaction was, oh my gosh, we just felt this big earthquake. We must be on our own, because if we felt shaking at this level, what just happened to San Francisco, right? So having a system like ShakeAlert, which can give you real-time information that an earthquake has just happened, this is where it was, this is the magnitude, and this is the expected shaking at your location, the people of Napa would have breathed a little bit of a sigh of relief knowing that mutual aid was coming to them and that they weren't completely alone. That, of course, got sorted out in the early hours of the morning, but would have been great to have that information at 3 a.m. The other thing that is very useful are tabletop exercises. Most recently, the United States Geological Survey put out what's called the haywired scenario. And haywired imagines a large damaging earthquake striking the East Bay in our wired world, right? The last time we had a major large earthquake striking the East Bay was back in 1989. Loma Prieta earthquake, okay? And it caused a lot of damage, particularly on the East Bay. But now we have just-in-time communications. We have just-in-time delivery of goods and services. We don't have these big stockpile warehouses like we used to for goods and commodities. And so how does that change our approach to responding to an earthquake, especially when communications may be down? So if you haven't already, I encourage you to look at that publication and think about how you can put that together for your tabletop exercises. So finally, what's another mitigation strategy that we're all here to talk about today? ShakeAlert. So I've told you that we've got seismic stations installed all up and down the West Coast. And so these are a nice map showing where they are. They're pretty densely spaced all throughout the West Coast. And so the goal is to not just put stations on the faults, but also stations a bit off the faults. A lot of times people think of faults as these big gashes in the ground that geologists and field teams just go out and they're like, that's the fault, clearly. And they draw a line on a map and you know the earthquakes are gonna happen there. That's not really how it happens in real life. Most of these faults are underground, and the only way we know they exist is because an earthquake has happened there. So if we think back to how I was talking about geologic time, if we've only been measuring earthquakes really well with instrumentation since about the 50s, we've only known about plate tectonics since about the 50s. If the earthquake has not happened on that fault since the 50s, we probably have no idea that it exists. So you have to also put stations outside the known fault area so you can catch those unknown earthquakes and still protect people. Okay, so how can you make use of ShakeAlert at your organization? Well, we have been building a community and asking people what their needs are. People need fast, reliable alerts. They need guidance on how to use the alerts. They need funding for putting the alerts into practice at their organization. And they kind of need a roadmap vision of how you go through this process. But we also want to build a sense of community. And so we have created the Joint Committee for Communication, Education, and Outreach to serve those needs. So people can participate in community calls. They can interface with other groups that are going down the same path that you might be, and be able to learn best practices. What else do people who want to join ShakeAlert need? Well, they want to know what the magnitude of the earthquake is. They want to know the shaking intensity, what we call MMI, a modified Mercalli intensity index, so they know how to best respond. People need maps. You know, a lot of emergency managers like to sit there with their Sharpies and draw things on maps, right? These are valuable things. Of course, it depends on your audience, it depends on your users, your community, and your alert distribution method. But we want to attack all those scenarios. Also, user needs are application specific. General alerts that go out to a varied audience may need to be less specific than somebody running a SCADA system and having to deal with critical operations. And so we work with end users and technical users to kind of tailor different approaches and different operations for the real boots on the ground situation. And we have other groups that have been running this for years as well. And so we have a community that you can learn best practices for. The other important thing is that you're not on your own as this. This community, as I said, also talks about education and outreach. So we see ShakeAlert as being part of your emergency toolkit, not the whole, you don't put all your eggs in the emergency basket. Part of the education is letting people know that the system will not be perfect. There will be missed and false alerts because we are trying to characterize earthquakes in mere seconds, send that information to you in mere seconds. And so don't kind of put your most expensive thing where it would be worse to shut the thing down and not get an earthquake than for it to just shake. Think about these things as you work on your implementations. Our estimations are also not going to be perfect. So again, when I talked about the magnitude is a measurable thing according to what we know about earthquake physics. It is a measurable amount of energy that the earthquake releases globally. As you saw in the movie, the earthquake does not release that energy all in one spot. It is all over the map. Those red areas impact a very large area of the map. As a result, our intensity measurements at your particular location are not going to be super precise and tailored. It's going to be like a smeared out average for your area. So if you happen to be sitting on very silty soil, you are going to get shook a lot more and a lot longer than somebody across the street who is sitting on top of a very nice granite quarry that's going to feel a big thump and then it's going to go past them. So a knowledge about where your assets are, what kind of things your people could experience will help you also gauge response based on intensity. Not everything is also going to benefit from an early warning system. Not everything can take action within mere seconds to take protective action. Some of your ideas are not going to work. If you want to install ShakeAlert somewhere, much like we saw with the EOC in San Francisco, only installing it at your EOC is not the best tool. To be fair, they were very, very early on and they were the guinea pigs, and we have learned lessons from them. So I do not want this to be a knock on San Francisco. Somebody had to do it, and somebody had to make mistakes in order to make the system better. Of course, it's great to install it there. So if you're in the middle of an EOC and you get an aftershock, but this is an ongoing process. You too are going to make terrible mistakes and going to mess up, but it's an ongoing process that we learn from each other and we keep building a better system. So what are the next steps? How do you become a partner? Well, we are working with the USGS. They coordinate licensing pathways so that people can become authorized recipients of this ShakeAlert information. You start off by doing a pilot project where you say you want to test something out with a bunch of your buildings. And eventually, as you refine that pilot and you put in systems that work for your community, you can eventually become a licensed operator of the system and just be able to run it in perpetuity. The information and specific documentation that needs to be filled out for licensing can be found at that website, shakealert.org/implementation/partners. And as I mentioned, once you become part of this community, you can go to the community calls and the technical partner forum to learn more. So what do partners do? So partners may focus on in-house users. If you have a business, if you have a county office, if you have a specific use type that is just focused on your particular users and not redirecting to the public, you may choose to make your own homegrown solution. You may have that sort of expertise in-house, or you may have a product that you already use that you could just add earthquake early warning onto. Another way that people partner is as a technology enabler. For pilots, these are generally limited geographically in sort of a test mode, and they're doing limited alerting to just those test groups. But the eventual idea is that they're going to grow a system where they develop third-party solutions. You can imagine a company developing some sort of device that eventually you're going to go buy at Home Depot or Lowe's to just put in your business. Once either these in-house users or technology enablers have a proof of concept that really works, has a good education and training module within their system, they can become licensed operators, which are scaled up geographically to wherever ShakeAlert is served. And they can alert customers and kind of go to this market level. Okay, so let's say you want to become an in-house user or a technology user. What do you do? Okay, well, it's an iterative process. As I said, nobody gets this right on the first time. You know, you are not going to have the absolute perfect statement of work and then go through the cycle and like be done. So that's why it's a ongoing circle here. So first you would go to the website, shakealert.org/implementation/partners, and you would fill out your pilot license. That requires a statement of work, and there's a bunch of boilerplate because obviously you're connecting to government computers to receive the signal, so you have to have a license in order to do that. Then you start building your in-house solution or commercial solution. And so you pick your location, you start working on your installation, and then you do a demonstration of how your system works out. And finally, you take that prototype system that you think looks really good, and then you explore, set expectations, and provide education for people who might be using your product. And then you keep iterating as it goes along until you have something that you think is a workable solution, and then you would apply for your license to operate. Now, some of you may have glassed over eyes at this point going, oh my God, Jen, I did not sign up for this so that I could develop this whole new technology thing. I just want to get ShakeAlert. So there's also another option that you can use where you totally bypass all of the statement of work, you totally bypass all of this development, and you just become a user of one of the licensed operators. So again, at shakealert.org, you can find a link to our, I believe it's 8 licensed operators that we have so far. You can click through the links and look at their offerings and see if one of those solutions would work for you. I do not have any information on what these various groups charge. I don't want to know. That is their business and your business, but reach out to them and you can see what services they provide, what sort of subscription or installation models that they have, and see if they can serve your needs without you having to do this process. But if you do want to go through this process and you do want to create something based on your own internal expertise, this is sort of the overview of what the system does for technical partners. The USGS ShakeAlert system does the real-time earthquake monitoring. We have algorithms that run automatically to detect the earthquake, and ShakeAlert publishes a ShakeAlert message that has the location of the earthquake, the magnitude of the earthquake, the time it happened, and the expected intensity. And so what an end user does is they subscribe to what we call an active MQ feed. The feed of that information is coming in real time. And you listen for your desired message type. This could be just information, blanket information about the earthquake, or you could get contours or sort of grid dots that give you intensity information. Once you've listened and received this message, then you would need to create some sort of code that parses the data, that extracts information of interest to you. These messages are in XML format. They're very sort of system agnostic text. They're relatively easy to parse the values for. Then once you have the values that you want, you can create either if then that solutions or some other automated control that performs your user-defined actions based on extracted values. We do have a wonderful GitLab repository that has access to various code snippets, stomp protocols, sample messages. So you're not doing this all on your own. You don't have to be like a coding super user to be able to connect to the system. So we have technical guidance to help you through this process. So with that, I'm going to close and say a warm thank you for inviting me to your meeting and be able to share about the ShakeAlert system. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Normally, when it's not COVID, I drive all over the place and chat with people in person so we can have a more dynamic way of putting this all together. But please feel free to email me. Again, you can find the paperwork at this website, and I'm excited to possibly partner with many of you in the future.